Hi folks, happy Friday, welcome to the weekend. I trust that you've managed to get a bit of reading done this week and that you've enjoyed it. And on that subject, what have I been reading this week? First up was Pushing Ice by Alastair Reynolds, which is one of his standalone science fiction books. And this was a reread for me. I read it years and years ago, not long after it first came out probably, and I listened to it this time on audiobook. But really I remembered very little of it, and I might as well not have read it before. The book opens with a meeting of the high muckety-mucks of something called the Congress of the Lindblad Ring, which is some kind of far future interstellar community, some 500 light years rather, across. And in that meeting, they're debating how best to honour the memory of somebody called Bella Lind, the woman that they consider to be responsible for the advancement and expansion of humanity across the stars. Cue wavy effects on the screen as we go back in time to the mid-21st century, where the Rockhopper and its crew are busy mining comets. They push ice. It's what they do. But they get a sudden message, an urgent message, telling them that Janus, one of Saturn's moons, has upped and decided to leave the solar system. It's accelerating and on its way out far into space. And to cut a long story short, the Rockhopper gets a new mission to catch up with Janus and to do some exploring before it leaves the solar system forever. The crew then agrees terms and off they head. Pushing Ice really is a variation on the big dumb object theme, an oft-repeated trope in science fiction. There's Janus for a start, which is definitely big and quite dumb. And dumb, by the way, in this context, doesn't mean stupid. At least I don't think it does. I think it means silent. Dumb as in not speaking or not able to speak. So it's dumb in that respect rather than, being a silly old big object. Anyway, where were we? Yes, Pushing Ice, a variation on the big dumb object theme. There is Janus, and there's also another much larger megastructure later on in the book, which appears to be Janus's ultimate destination. Due to unhappy accident or possibly sabotage, there are a number of issues aboard the Rockhopper. Tempers fray and a schism erupts, which will resonate down the following decades, to ebb and flow as each of the factions in turn makes a poor decision. Like it or not, Janus is now home for the crew of the Rockhopper, and they get busy building a ramshackle town for themselves on the surface. There are numerous aliens later on in the book, which I thought were done pretty well, some offering aid and succour to the growing population on Janus, and some with tempting offers but hidden intentions, and some that just remain enigmatic throughout. I enjoyed the early phase of life on Janus, the bootstrapping elements of it, making the best of things. And it reminded me a little bit of the early parts of Seven Eves, when the International Space Station has expanded and upgraded to cope with a much larger population. There's a lot to like in this book. There's a good deal of enigmatic relics, some alien and some otherwise. There's an envoy from the far future, or is it the past by now, time dilation being what it is. And there's some very human factional infighting and assorted peril from multiple directions. I enjoyed the dynamic between Bella and her one-time best friend and chief engineer Svetlana. I thought that was well done. Both are flawed and both acting in what they believe to be the best interests of all. And there are no easy answers. So I liked it. It's hard science fiction. It's a big dumb object tale in the traditions of Ringworld, Rama, and probably Orbitsville, with a side order of First Contact. And like most of the Alastair Reynolds audiobooks, Pushing Ice is narrated by a chap called John Lee, who unfortunately has a rather dry delivery. Maybe that suits the rock-hard nature of the writing, but it can be a bit unengaging, a little bit easy to tune out of if you're not concentrating 100%. But overall, I enjoyed it. It's good. It's not my favourite of his standalone books. I think it's probably House of Suns, but it holds up. It's well worth a read if you haven't read it. Next up was Where the Late Bird Sang by Kate Wilhelm, and this is a Hugo Award-winning classic, of course. We meet the Sumner family, who live in a fertile, defensible valley in Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley region. And the elders of the clan can see that things are going to pot in the outside world. The birth rate is dropping alarmingly. Pollution and radiation are an issue. There's drought and famine and climate change, and you name it. Fortunately for them, the Sumner clan are not mere farmers, although they do a bit of that too. Some of them are scientists, some are lawyers, some business people, and some of them quite wealthy. They decide that cloning is going to be an important technology, and they get busy learning how to do it, and they build a slightly implausible hospital and a research facility in the caves which pepper the hills on their land just in the last couple of years before things go completely to pot. So maybe it's a slightly implausible setup, but I think that the premise is less important than the resulting human interest. Over a few skips forward, we end up in a world where the clan has expanded in number via several generations of clones, with some good old-fashioned baby-making thrown in for good measure. Trouble is brewing, though. The clan is running out of vital supplies, and they must go out into the world to forage for knowledge and scientific equipment in the devastated and depopulated cities. To add to the basic dangers of such a trek, it quickly transpires that the clones can't bear to be away from their stablemates, their identical brothers and sisters. The empathic link between them is too strong. This is a problem that really needs to be solved, but in the solving of it, the community faces breakdown and a split, a schism. I found the book to be a charming mix of the human and the quotidian and the hard science that Wilhelm brings to the tale. The characters are compelling, and I thought that her prose is wonderful. She conjures a very bucolic image of the home valley, and the expeditions to the cities are tense and at times thrilling. She does a nice job of the relationships, and I thought that several of those are quite poignant and tragic. And in the later stages of the book, we follow a young lad called Mark, who's a child born naturally to an illicit pairing of two clones who are later hounded out of the valley. He's bullied by the clone children and is very independently minded and curious in ways that they're no longer able to imitate. And I liked what Kate Wilhelm did with this character as we see him grow into a self-assured man as the book progresses. And maybe, just maybe, he's the saviour of humanity. I found Kate Wilhelm's writing to be very accessible. It's not at all fiddly. It reminded me a little bit of Brian Aldiss in her descriptions and of Zena Henderson in her treatment of the strange children. I enjoyed it very much and I whipped through it in no time. Very much recommend it. Next, I read The Holy Machine by Chris Beckett. And Chris Beckett's an author, one of many actually, that I didn't even know existed before I started really focusing on science fiction a couple of years back. But I have read a fair few of his books now, and I really like his uncomplicated writing style. He always has something interesting to say, and I was keen to read The Holy Machine, which I think I'm right in saying was his first published novel. There's been a general retreat from reason around the world for reasons which aren't really specified. It's just labelled as the reaction with a capital R. And there's been a rise of fundamentalist religion of all stripes around the world. Amongst all of that intolerance, there's been a flight, a retreat. Somebody somewhere has built something called Illyria, which is known as the city, which is a refuge for the rational, for the atheist and for the scientific. Existence for whom has become precarious outside the city by this stage. I'm imagining something like Dubai or Singapore, but in this case on the coast of the Eastern Mediterranean, somewhere Balkans-ish or Greece-ish. It wasn't completely clear where. The city is now a refuge, as I say, for scientists and atheists and researchers and their ilk, and it's wealthy and high-tech compared to the increasingly backward statelets that surround it. Robots are now common in the city, and there are some that are very realistic indeed, the syntax. And plus there's a ubiquitous virtual reality called SenseSpace, which is highly immersive. We follow George Simling, who is a bit of a sad loner, poorly socialised, and who lives with his mother still, who's addicted to SenseSpace, spending nearly her entire waking hours in a full-body haptic suit. Our man George is a translator, an in-demand skill in the city, surrounded as they are by numerous people speaking many languages, the Outlanders. Inevitably, the most realistic of the robots, the Syntax, are used for sex work. And George, being a bit of a sad sack, starts to get his rocks off visiting the robot whorehouses. And he takes the shine to a particular one, Lucy, which is just one of her names. She has one for each of the archetypes that she has in her repertoire. And she, of course, is a very beautiful Syntax. George feels like he's getting to know Lucy and has spotted that she is glitching a little bit, starting to question her existence and her very nature. She is developing a bit of a personality. There's a broader background issue with the self-evolving robots that results in a citywide edict that all must be factory reset every 6 months to ensure smooth operation. George is horrified that Lucy might get wiped like this and plans their escape. It's a rather ill-conceived, half-assed escape plan, unfortunately, akin to running from the frying pan and into the fire. Their only route to escape being the Outlands, where robots of any kind, but especially the Syntax, are an abomination. I think Chris Beckett tries to achieve a lot in The Holy Machine, and possibly too much in one relatively slender book. Illyria is not perfect, far from it. There are issues with guest workers and their rights and status, and there are increasingly strict edicts about religious beliefs, mirroring the intolerance seen in the outside world. And it might have been easy for an author, particularly a science fiction author, to have us side with the rational scientists, the atheists of the piece. But Beckett is at pains to show that they're just as bad as the backwards god-botherers next door. Lucy, once a slutty caricature, a slave to her programming, is increasingly self-aware, a neat mirroring of George's mother, Ruth, who is sliding ever more into unawareness, spending all of her time in SenseSpace. Lucy could easily have been a standard cute robot, an oft-repeated trope in science fiction, but I think that Beckett does something interesting with her. She doesn't need to rest, so whilst George is getting his beauty sleep, she reads. And they're in the ultra-religious Outlands by this time, where the reading material is limited to holy books and religious screeds. She methodically works her way through it all, making as much sense of it as a robot can, a body of philosophy and meaning that becomes important as the book progresses. George's clumsy attempt to keep Lucy's true nature a secret do not survive sceptical questioning by the rubes that they encounter as they travel around the Outlands, not helped by Lucy's deep programming and her innate responses to any kind of attention by a man. There's only so many times that you can laugh off, "Would you like hand relief?" As an opening remark from your fake wife. Drunken incaution on George's part in one such exchange ends in disaster, but sets the stage for the later part of the book, some redemption for George and an unexpected role for a much changed Lucy. I really like Beckett's writing style. His prose is uncomplicated. He uses short, punchy sentences, each simple enough on its own, but woven together into a cloth, which in The Holy Machine examines some pretty interesting questions. The nature of utopia, the very possibility of it in an imperfect world, the nature of sentience and humanity, and the imbalances and dangers of intolerances of all kinds, the merits and dangers of virtual spaces, loneliness, extremes. There is a lot going on, and perhaps that's a minor failure, a trap for young players, let's say, this being Chris Beckett's first novel. I blew through it in no time at all. It's a quick read and I enjoyed it very much indeed. All right, time for Indy Corner. This is a sporadic feature where I showcase a self-published novel, or if it's not self-published, then at least not traditionally published. As I've said before, I get emails from time to time asking me to review a novel on my channel, and rather than overcommit myself when I already have a literal mountain of books to read, I will instead share a few details here, in case they're of interest to you. First up is Major, Operation Dreadnought by Rob Potter, I think. In a world torn apart by war and pollution, technologically advanced animals fight for survival. Badgers, by the way, fiercely protective of their fertile land, clash with foxes who are being manipulated by the pesky humans. The stage is set for an epic battle of survival, apparently. Meet Major, a valiant Special Forces commander whose mission, that's a Badger Special Forces commander, I believe, whose mission to eradicate ruthless raiders takes an unexpected turn when he finds himself stranded on the wrong side of the border. As Major unravels the dark intentions of the oppressive Council of Cities and the army commanded by the merciless Velnius, he must band together with our unlikely allies to combat the looming threat of invasion. With guerrilla tactics and unwavering courage, Major and his comrades face a relentless enemy, bracing themselves for a battle that will determine the fate of all creatures in this unforgiving landscape. My initial response to this, to the Special Forces badgers and the like, was, oh, come on, really? Taking a step back, though, there's a long history of animals as characters in fiction. There's Watership Down, of course, and Plague Dogs by the same author, Tarka the Otter. Much more recently and firmly in the science fiction category is Paul McCauley's Beyond the Burn Line, which has intelligent, tool-using, civilised raccoons, of all things, who have evolved and inherited the earth after their former slave masters, the bears, have more or less died out. So, titty you not, badgers and foxes it is. Rob, I gather, is ex-military, so the combat scenes in this are apparently very well done by all accounts. Next, we got Cold-Blooded, a Cold Rush novella by Rohan O'Doul, and in this case, veteran Marine Mint only worries about one thing, herself. But after being ordered back to the front line, she has a decision to make, to stand up and do the right thing, or to finally get what she always wanted. 15-year-old Frida lives in deep space on a pirate vessel, and her father is a dissident warrior who fights the corporations running the system. When a corporation battlecruiser catches up to the aging pirate vessel, death appears to be the only escape. Rohan tells me that Cold-Blooded is part of the Cold Rush universe, but can be read standalone, and the books ultimately can be read in any order. He also told me that he has plans to write several more novellas in this shared universe, and he describes the books as space opera with a touch of military science fiction thrown in for good measure. As usual with this segment, I haven't read either of these myself, or at least not yet, so I can't vouch for them personally. But I will put links to both in the description for the video so that you can find them if they sound like your cup of tea. Briefly then, channel stuff next. Subs are at 5,009, which is up 135 on last week. It's a really good week. This week marks two little milestones for my channel. We're now at, as you saw, over 5,000 subscribers, which is a very pleasing round number indeed. And then last week's weekly update video is the first of those weekly diaries to get over 1,000 views. When I started doing these weekly videos in January of 2024, I think it was, they typically got 300, maybe 400 views at the start, and they've grown kind of gradually as the years progressed, and very nicely along with the rest of the channel. So it's very pleasing in both cases. Anyway, if you are one of those 135 new subscribers, or if you've just stumbled across my channel for the first time today, a huge welcome to you all. My name's John, and I focus on collecting, reading, and whittering on about science fiction books, old and new. Comment of the week was from Steve, otherwise known as the Outlaw Bookseller, is a fellow tuber of books. He spotted my review of Tom Toner's The Weight of the World in last week's weekly update and held forth on the topic. Apparently, Tom had originally planned for the Amarantine Spectrum to be a 9-book epic, which would have been quite something, I think, based on my reading of the first 2. I would be fascinated to know what he would have done with it if he'd been given free rein. Steve does give a tantalising hint that there might possibly be some kind of reboot at some point in the future, but that, generally speaking, Tom's best work is yet to come, which is super encouraging. Thanks to Steve for taking the time to leave that comment, and to all of the rest of you that do the same. I do always very much appreciate it. Let's take a quick look at what was on the channel this week. On Wednesday, there was a recap of February's reading where I managed to get through 12 books, despite there being a couple of non-starters. And as usual in that video, I review each book that I read briefly, I rank them mercilessly, and then ultimately declare a book of the month. If you're a regular viewer of these weekly updates, then there's an element of repetition in those monthly recaps, as I am obviously looking back at the same books that I've reviewed in my weekly updates. But I do string them all together. There is the element of ranking and ultimately, as I said, the book of the month. So there is a bit of extra value in those videos for you as well. On the book buying front, it's been quite a quiet week. I recorded the book haul for March last weekend, and I've jammed all of those books, and I do mean jammed all of those books, onto my shelves by hook or by crook. And mainly as a result of how sobering an experience that was, I really just don't have much space left. I've bought very little since. There's just 3 books on my to-be-hauled pile at the moment, which includes an upgraded copy of one that I actually already had in my collection. I've replaced a slightly scruffy ex-library copy with a fresh from the publisher as new copy in hardback, and it's very nice indeed. To quote Harry Harrison, I need to make room on my shelves, and you can expect some form of cull coming in the next few weeks, I think. And I'll obviously share the details of that with you in video form. Let's take a quick look at what's coming on the channel this week. At the risk of repeating myself, my content schedule remains patchy and will continue to be so until the training for the long distance event is done and the race itself in early April. After which I'm hoping that normal service or something like it will be restored. Still, this week there will definitely be the opening lines video. That will be on Thursday, I think, and it will be simultaneously launched along with Whitney at Secret Source of Storycraft, who has a similar video in mind. And as I say, I've recorded the book haul video, which I still need to edit. That will appear the following weekend, I think, around mid-month. I have made some small progress on the research for the sequel to the hard science fiction video, but I'm nowhere near yet ready to record it. I might be able to record that audience recommendations video that I've been banging on about for weeks this weekend, but no promises, we'll see. What will I be reading in the coming week? I made a start on These Burning Stars last weekend, and I'm somewhere between about a third and half the way through. I might finish that this weekend, or it might leak into the following week, I think. So far, so good. I'm enjoying it. And I think after that on audiobook, I'm going to spaff a Audible credit and give Jack Glass a listen, and I doubt that I'll finish that during the week. That will probably run into the following weekend, I think. And then in physical book form, I am actually almost finished the Yiddish Policeman's Union. I did think that I might get it done before recording this video, but I didn't quite. I've got about 70 pages to go, so I will almost certainly finish that this weekend, if not this evening. In fact, I'm really enjoying it, and I think if I get nothing else from that Broderick and DeFilippo 100 best novels list than this, and I've got much more than this, but if this was the only thing, then I think the time that I've spent poring over that list and acquiring books would have been worth it. It's really good, and I'm really enjoying Michael Chabon's writing. But that will soon be finished, and after that I'm going to tackle High Rise by J.G. Ballard, which I don't think will be a lengthy read. Usually his writing's pretty crisp, but we'll see how we go. And if I have time after that, then I'll make a start at least on Heliconia Spring by Brian Aldiss. And actually, if I don't know that I'll finish this, but if I break the back of that during the week, then I've got 4 books left on my planned TBR pile with 2 and a bit weeks of March left. So I think I'll be able to add 1 or 2 more into the mix as we go. Famous last words. We'll see how we get on. As always, thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. And until next time, goodbye for now.